Hi, my name is Benedict for Higher Hertz. This video is about parallel processing. Over the last few years, there got to be so much excitement, so much rah-rah and blather about parallel processing. Unfortunately, what happened was that a lot of people ended up doing it without having a reason why. And that's always the worst way to make a mix. Mixing isn't about piling up as many pro or advanced techniques as you can. It's about finding the balance in the story and telling it. Obviously, being able to do that with clarity and beauty in the balance. If it's not elegant, it's nowhere. And technique for technique's sake is never elegant. You look at artists who have tremendous technique, but perhaps a little less focused on the elegance, and they never do as well as somebody who's very elegant. Let's pick a pair of guitarists. It's not about what you like or don't like, but let's pick old Dave Gilmour from Pink Floyd, who has wonderful elegance as a player. Some people say, oh, but he's not very fancy. No, he's not. I mean, sit there and watch Pulse, and you're like, oh, he doesn't play at 1,000,000 miles an hour. There's no tapping. There's no jumping, no foot up on the speaker wedge or anything like that, but there's tremendous beauty and elegance. And Pink Floyd, one of the biggest names in rock forever, and will probably stay that way for the foreseeable future. And then let's pick Joe Satriani. Joe Satriani is a very technical player, and apart from one song, he's really not managed to have hits. The one song kind of stands out because it actually is elegant. The rest of the record, and really all his other songs, don't hit. Like, as in, they don't get into the public consciousness because they're very technical, but they're not elegant. Now, that's not me having a go at him. That's his style. That's his thing. But to point out that there is just such a big diversion or separation between being highly technical and being elegant. If you are an indie, as in you're doing this yourself, you're putting your own tracks out, or you're hiring somebody to help you make your tracks the best they possibly can be, you want to look for elegance, because elegance is what's really going to stand out, unless you are playing the technical game, in which case you have to be faster, harder, louder than Satriani, Vai, whoever it is that you're trying to outdo. And the problem is they've got way more money behind them than you do, in which case chances are you're better off going down the elegance path. Okay, parallel processing. Let's give you an example. Oh, a little bit of housekeeping. I do have a fan on the background. If you hear it, you probably won't. But if you do hear a little bit of background hiss or hum, that is probably the fan, because it's about 33 degrees with 75% humidity at least, which is unpleasant to say the least in a closed room. Here's a drum mix which uses some parallel processing. I impressed myself. Can you hear the parallel processing? I hope the answer is no. But there is sort of a way to know that it's there, because this kick drum that seems a little too good to be true, and it is. So let's take our kick drum, which we've separated out and then processed in parallel. Let's put it back where it came from. It's neither technical nor elegant, simply because it's trying to do too many things at once. Now, is this going to be bad in a mix? No, it's actually probably going to be quite cool. The drive here is suited to without the kick drum, hence my turning it off. So I'm not saying this is bad with that drive off or with a different form of it. Then I think we still would work very, very nicely as a drum mix. But if we don't really like what that kick drum is and how it's sitting and what it's doing, we can break it out. That's not parallel, although all mixing is parallel, as we'll discuss in a moment. And then we can process it separately. So if we take just this, turn off all its EQ, and let's just mute this guy. we kind of end up with the same thing. Let's turn off his EQ as well. We've kind of got the same thing, but it's in having these two halves. So if we take this kick and say, look, I want more, then we can do this, which is one form, which like one path, which focuses on a certain set of features of that instrument. And then we can go, okay, what about the other one? And we pick another part of that sound. And now we've got a sort of what we might call hyper-real kick drum, because we're able to do far more in two passes than if we were to try to do one pass. Like if we were to take this kick drum and try and do both of these EQ curves at once, it would not work as well. We would have some difficulties. So by separating it out and saying, in this pass, we're going to focus on this, because we're really only working on one thing. If you try to work on more than one thing, chances are you will fail, or the compromise may not suit what you're looking for. That doesn't make it wrong. I'm all about doing things as much together as possible. That's why I do very little parallel processing. But there are times, like if someone comes to me and this is what they need, you know, like they come to me and they go, we need that Metallica kick drum, Bob Rock's Metallica kick drum, then it's going to be a parallel process. And that way we can pull that out, have this larger-than-life, hyper-real kick drum along with the rest of our mix, which allows us to process everything differently. So what's parallel mixing? Well, parallel mixing and processing, parallel processing is really the term that's used, but everything's parallel. As in, if we were to open our door and we have a music bed, we have a verse, we have a vocal backing for that, and then we have some harmonies. They're all running at once. They're all running in parallel. Now, before people get, but, it's like, I want you to understand that this is the essence of mixing. That it's not as soon as you mention the word parallel, like we're suddenly in a different universe where we're cheating the laws of physics and doing more pro stuff. We're just doing our job. The question is, does the job require doing? As I've shown here, it may or may not. This is irrelevant because there's no mix to put it in. But if we're wanting to really pull that kick out and make it more dramatic, have more control over it, then parallel is a really cool way of doing it. Let's look at a picture. What is parallel processing? Here's a picture. We've got an input, in this case was our kick. We split it into two or more versions of itself, which are the same. Now, this does not mean that you should take vocal or guitar parts and clone them and process them differently. That is, well, just dumb. It's not good parallel processing, it's not good mixing. This is for a particular purpose, because we need to make them one again. And this is really important. Look at the top half, we've got the input, we split it out into process A and process B, but then we put them back together again. They must appear as one thing. That kick drum appears as one thing. The kit kind of appears as one thing. To the average punter, yes, they're going to go, ooh, what an amazing sounding kit. Give or take. Obviously, a more advanced mix engineer, more experienced, or skilled mix engineer might go, yeah, I hear what you're doing there. But skilled mix engineers or unskilled mix engineers are actually not the fan base. It's the fan base that are just going to listen and go, oh, listen to that. And that's how you get some of these amazing larger-than-life mixes like the Power Station, which is Robert Palmer and half of the Durans, Some Like It Hot, Thunderstruck, AC/DC's Thunderstruck, definitely. I would imagine there's a lot of parallel. I mentioned before Metallica, I reckon the kick drum on there is probably parallel to get that kind of result. The everything and the kitchen sink all at once without that feeling of as much compromise as we should probably have. So common examples of parallel processing, if we accept that all mixing is parallel because we've got all these things happening at once, we have to have them work together. Parallel processing, common examples we use all the time. If you are inserting a chorus or a delay, guess what? It takes that signal, splits it out. There's the dry signal. We do something to the wet signal. We drag it back in time and or rotate it so that it comes in and out of tune and put the pair back together as one sound. And now we've got sound with echo or sound with chorusing. That's parallel processing. You've been doing it all along. Another instance of that is a send reverb. We have our vocalist singing. We send some of that signal out, or we might send 100% of that signal out. It's a different method of mixing. We replace it with a reverberated version of said signal, so that's process B, becomes the reverby version of it, and we glue the two back together. So the audience needs to be hearing one vocal that happens to have a room space around it. If you're interested to know more about reverb, have a look. There are videos here on reverb. I've done quite a few of them, so you can watch quite a few and hear similar and slightly different takes on it. So chorus, delay, reverb, and especially on a send, they're all instances of parallel processing. So you're already parallel processing. You feel like you're missing out. No, you're not. You're already doing it. There are then these more, what we might call specialist, but not special as in they make you special. They're simply unique instances where we might do something like here. We have put one EQ process on at process A, a different EQ process on process B. We've pulled them back together. So we still have one sound, but we've managed to do more with it than we could realistically achieve with one process. So the common things that get done there in that sort of parallel is EQing, compression. We can take one of these, let's say this kick, we left that one alone. The other one, let's say we put a compressor on here, squished it, balanced the two up. That's increasingly being done within the one VST now. They often have a mix knob. For those who follow me, you know I'm not a big fan of it, but I will show how it works. Another one, which is commonly, again, far more likely to appear within one device and a mix knob these days, is drive. I'm really not a fan of that. That's not to say it's wrong for that person who wants to tell me that I'm missing out. No, I ain't missing out. I just don't like doing it that way. If I'm going to use drive, I'm going to do 100%, do the right drive of it and change it from there. But it is possible to use a lot more drive and then dial the mix back. To me, personally, the problem is that we've just got a horribly distorted sound that we're just mixing back in, and the two never really become one. I'm very dedicated to my mixes always feeling like one, even if there's a feeling of a lot of separations within all the parts of that mix. Like we can hear the fairies, we can hear the elephants, we can hear the dinosaurs all at once, but that mix has to feel like one. To me, having mix knobs on, particularly drive, it never becomes one again. The same problem can happen with certain kinds of reverbs. So parallel processing has its downsides in that if you are not careful, you don't end up with one again. You'll end up with a very dramatic sound. And it's possible here that my drum kit, that's all been cleverly, it's possible it doesn't fully sound like one drum kit anymore. I think it probably does, but we have no mix to put it in, so it's all irrelevant. But be very careful that you don't create this sound that's very dramatic because it's broken, that then never really sits in the mix. You'll be like, but it's so amazing. And if it is, and your track's amazing, like AC/DC's Thunderstruck or that Power Station stuff, have a look. I'll see if I can put some pictures up. When they first came out, that first one or two Power Station records, it was like, whoa, what's that? And technically those mixes are broken, but because it's done with such elegance, the music's good, but the mixing and production is so good that we buy it, even though it's, well, technically horrendously broken. But that's great art. That's when we do something that transcends what we had before. And that changed the way a lot of mixing was done, because people were like, you can do that, I can do that. And of course bands all wanted that. ridiculous, absurd, over-the-top kind of sound. It's not to say that Robert Palmer invented it, but there was a lot of him pushing that, and he made it very, very public. We've seen here what we can do. We can start with a pretty nothing kind of typical drum process. Now let's look at parallel compression. We bring in our sound, we say, okay, I kind of like this kit, but I also want it to be more, in which case we might do something truly brutal to it. Just as an aside, or not as an aside, as a warning, this process doesn't work if we are kind in our processing. So if we just do this, we achieve nothing. This is where you should be at 100%. If you want subtle compression or just tasteful compression, then you don't do this. What we do with parallel is this kind of stuff. Now that's nasty. It's not good compression, but if we put the two together, we've changed the feeling of that kit. Is this good? Is this bad? It's irrelevant because there's no mix to put it in, but you can hear that the kit changes. It does become beefier, and it does also actually rise in the mix, as in the frequency rises, therefore it gets more punch. And therefore sounds a bit more mean. You've got to take great care there. It's possible to make that really nasty. If you just want to dial in a little more thickness, then you often have to fix your levels later. But that's the concept. There is no right point at which it works, but there will be quite a lot of points at which you've probably broken it. And again, the right and wrong always comes down to, do I have one sound at the end? If you've got two sounds that really aren't glued together properly and come across and the audience will buy as though, oh, that's one sound, then you've broken it. So that is a way of doing it. I'm not going to show you distortion using this kind of process, simply because, as I say, I don't think that it's a great method, nor have I ever used it in a way in which I would encourage anybody to use it either. But if you need to know, it's a case of getting the splatty, grindy sound that you want on one side and then mixing it in. Is it good? You're going to have to work that out, but remember, make the distinction between something that comes out sounding like one sound or something that comes out and sounds dramatic and exciting because it's broken, in which case it becomes technical or ego rather than making a great song. But it all comes down to finding a balance somewhere in that knobbage. Let's just pull this back a little bit kinder. Let's look a little bit at this. Oh, and also because we've got this separated out, it gave us freedom to create a different kind of processing on the other drums, because I've only pulled out the kick, but by taking out the weight of the kick, I was able to give them a lot more oomph. So that helps balance them. Because if this is not here, hear how the rest of the kit sort of has this enormous kick drum, but the rest of the kit, like the snares a little bit, So that's a form of parallel. You simply separate it out and going, I'm going to do this here, I'm going to do that there. But make sure you bring them together. The reason here that I have a compressor and potentially EQ is that I need this kit to become one again. We'll look at that in a moment. So we've pulled out this kick. If we get our EQ and we go, okay, I want to do this, I want like huge amounts of oomph, but I also want huge amounts of this. Hear how we're sort of, as we push one part, we're compromising the other. So while it's tempting to try to do all at once, and if you are, cuts become pretty important. Sometimes your cuts are more important than your boosts. But it doesn't always work out as easily. I would be looking to do it in one go first, because the more natural something is, generally the better it is going to be. But if you want to do parallel, the example I'm using here is we sort of say, let's really work on the bassy part of it. Okay, let's say that for example. We scoot over here. And then we say, okay, well, what do I want to balance this out? And that's, now we probably don't want to go adding more bass here, because if we add more bass, like, well, an idiot, then we're going to have a world of problems. See, that just isn't getting any better. So it's better to say, okay, I'll pull out the stuff that I've done in the other channel. So in pass A, I've said, let's work on the low end of this, in which case you see how I got rid of a fair amount of the high end. Never get rid of all of it. There has to be what's called crossover, because if we take this, especially if we've got this, we can end up with some difficulties. Now this can work with a kick drum, simply because a kick drum is largely heard as the what we might call the lower tone and the beater on the front. So we can get away with it here. And it sounds very dramatic. But is it a good idea? I'm not entirely sure. So I would generally encourage using a bit of crossover. So as you see, we've still got some of that signal there, and then on this side, where's my roll-off? Is there. We've got some of this here. And we can even choose to do things like choose specific frequencies and get pretty full on with them. And see how it gives us a level of control. If I was sweeping around on a single channel like this, I'd be messing up or influencing what was happening with the bottom end, because it would get moved around by what's happening here. Whereas here, I can say, okay, here's the bit that I want, I'll set that sort of in stone, and then I will go play with the other bits that I want on parallel channels. Now, technically, you could have 300 parallel channels doing a different EQ point on each one. I do not advise this as an approach. It does not make you more pro to have 300 channels of the same sound. It's probably really unwise, but sooner or later somebody might do something based upon that. And if it works really well, if they've got a Power Station, if they've got a Thunderstruck, if they've got a Cher's Believe, absolutely good on them. But you've got to win with it. It's got to be elegant. So we have this sound that's a result of 2 passes. Now we've got to bring it back together. This is really pretty important. If you don't bring it back together, as I keep saying, you will have some issues. I will recommend doing something that brings it back together. Now, you may choose to EQ the points that you've got before, in which case you need to probably de-emphasize the EQ that you've been working on before. But you could. I often like to almost undo some of what I've done, because then you've got all those phase alterations, you've got all those curves creating something more intriguing. And to me, at least in headphones, which are awful, that sounds kind of cool. But because we've separated our kit as well, we need to make sure that they come back together nicely. And this is the sort of way you can do that. The other ways being, of course, that you can EQ, and you can do things like pulling in, let's say, for example, some drive. Let's go with, so let's try tube. This is going to be pretty full on. That gives us a pretty nice sound. That's going to work nicely in the right sort of situation. Again, what's right or wrong is irrelevant here, just showing you the logic of how we put that together. So that's one sort of thing that you can do. Something that a lot of people don't often do, but can be really wonderful, and was the reason why I built this fine fella, is tiny, tiny spaces, micro spaces. So here we've applied a micro space. Generally you don't want to do that too much on drums, but this is called a drum room. And a drum room is a big important part of a kit. We might well take this and go, I'm going to put that before my compressor. And that gives some vibrance to our drums. By giving it some actual space. We can hear it's changing our groove. we've pulled those things back together. So that's how you can have, Robert Palmer Power Station, Thunderstruck, Metallica's kick drum, that are absurd and impossible, but they seem so incredibly believable within the context because they're split apart and the ridiculous is done, the have your cake and eat it and have somebody else's cake and eat that one as well, all at the same time without any particular consequence, by making sure that when you bring them back together, that you're using a process or two to put them into the same space. So things like EQs, compressions, little bits of drive, saturation, and very much things like delays and reverbs. And that's exactly what Multiplier was built for, to give us these little tiny moving spaces. I've ended up with a fairly large space here, but there's nothing wrong with us having a tiny space. Obviously a little dramatic. And this is something that I do quite a lot with MIDI drums and various other MIDI sounds that people send. And then they're like, wow, how'd you get them so vibrant in the mix? I mean, this is one of the techniques. I'm not going to show all of them, but this is a useful technique because now this has got movement. Same. Vibrant, moving. Therefore, without doing humanize or anything like that, we can take our drum machine-y type thing and suddenly make it more vibrant. I know that seems like an aside, but this is, again, I emphasize the really important part. If you do the first half of separating things out, doing an aggressive process on path A, an aggressive process on path B, and the other 357 clones that you've got, if you don't bring them back together, you'll have 357 different sounds, which should sound like one thing, but don't. And remember, all mixing is parallel because we've got all these things happening at once, and we want people to believe that they are one event. So this is really important. The how you bring them back together is often more important than the how you separated them in the first place. Let's take our kick and put it back where it came from. Through drive, not nice. Yeah, we're just not winning, are we? And that's allowed us to be really, really dramatic with that kick. Again, this is why this is commonly enough used in metal and things like that. But any form can use this. But again, really strongly, do not take a guitar line or a vocal line and make a clone of it, as in just say, I'll duplicate that, put it somewhere else, and just give it a slightly different EQ and pretend that you've made backing vocals or a second guitar part. You take that and you pan them out, all you've got is phase problems, which makes your guitar sound weird and therefore less than it should. You're better off with one guitar in that situation. It's just one guitar. Sorry, foreigner. You're better off with one guitar in mono. It will be way more powerful because that's how punk done it, than you are in taking your one guitar, cloning it, which means they're exactly the same as each other, and thinking that if you apply a different process, it's not parallel processing, it's just wrong. It won't win. Okay, someone somewhere may say there's a reason why it's great, but I bet you their mix is probably not real great, or it's a dramatic effect and something's been done to make something of it. Again, with vocals, don't do that. If you are, or your singer is too lazy to do multiple takes, then, well, I don't know what to say to you. I really don't. You've got the wrong idea if you think that you can sing something once and it's going to be amazeful. You ask anybody, you ask Beyonce. I bet Beyonce spends an awful lot of time going, do I have to sing this again? Yes, miss. Do I have to sing this again? Yes, miss. Because ultimately, she knows that when people listen to Beyonce record, which I'm really not a fan, sorry, miss, or Mrs., whatever you want to be called, but I'm pretty confident that she does all the work, not just one lazy performance, wander out, go bling something, have a fight with Kanye or whatever. I have no idea, I don't care. Whilst some engineer just makes clones of, because then why would she be worth any money at all? So don't go cloning things. That's not parallel processing. It's just breaking what you've got. Make the most of what you have got. And if you do need to clone for some reason, I don't know whether anybody ever parallel processes vocals. If you do and you're doing something amazing with it, and people are like, "Wow, amazing." Yeah, I'm delighted to hear from you, but otherwise, the only time I've ever seen anybody trying to do anything like that, it just sounds really, really weird. In a bad kind of a way. Cher's Believe was weird, but it was a good kind of weird. Alright, relatively simple process. People make out that it's an amazing full-on kind of thing. Remember, as I've shown you here, parallel processing is used all the time. Mixing is a parallel process right from the beginning, but as soon as you're doing anything like a delay, a reverb, particularly a send, you are already parallel processing. You don't need to level up your game to a more profulness. What we might call specialist examples of where we might EQ this on path A, EQ that on path B, and put them back together. That's really what people mean when they talk about parallel processing. Go very carefully. Always remember the third stage, which is putting everything back together at the output, is where the real magic in the situation happens. Any idiot can take things, separate it out into 57 parts, process them all differently, and then end up with 57 things that don't make any sense at all. That's just technical. It's the elegance of how do I bring these back together and make this new, absurd, impossible thing feel believable. There are no particular, this is how you do it things. Obviously, Reason has a function where within our mixer, let's bring up F5. So if I've got something, I can simply say, I want to create a parallel channel, and it's going to create a parallel. Generally, a parallel mix channel, as a rule, will take from before any insert effects and obviously before sends or anything like that. So you should be getting the raw signal. So what's here should be this unaffected, and what's here should be this unaffected, in which case then you're going to get the right result. If you are looking to take something, affect it here, and then re-affect it here, that's not parallel, that's serial, as in they are a serial murderer because they murder somebody, they go away, watch television, go out the next night and murder somebody else. That's serial. They compound their murderiness with more murders. A parallel murder would require many people to go out to different places to do all the murders at, murder time. It's time to stop murdering. It has to be all happening at once, otherwise it's not parallel. It's simply become some kind of serial. There's nothing to stop you from doing bits and pieces of all of those things at once. Why you'd want to, I'm not sure, but if you hit a situation where it's really going to solve the problem and give you something amazingly, like, wow, and people are going to notice the difference in a good way, then by all means do it. Justify it to yourself that way. But always in, are people going to notice this? Are they going to go, wow, Thunderstruck, wow, Cher's Believe, wow, Power Station? If not, don't do it. It's just like setting yourself up like Joe Satriani to be the world's fastest guitar player, give or take. I'm only using him as an example, and then never managed to achieve Dave Gilmour status from this guy who plays really kind of slowly. As to how to do it in your DAW, please don't ask me. Read your DAW manual, so RTFM. Failing that, you can ask in a group or forum. If you use Logic, go to the Logic group. But please don't go to the Logic group before you have RTFM'd, because if you clearly haven't, then probably someone's just going to say RTFM, and you will deserve it at that point. It is on you to learn your tools, but sometimes these things can be slightly complex. Some systems will require, like Bitwig's The Grid, to do it, in which case you get your input and then you break into lots of little outputs. That's fine. Do it that way, so long as you bring it back together. Again, just be aware of any difference between parallel and serial, or combinations thereof. That's basically it. It is a surprisingly simple subject for which people get surprisingly about. There's no reason that it should be that way. It just is the way it is. We've got rid of that parallel, so you can just hear this again. Only trick or secret is what I've shown you in the how you bring it all together. You've got all your separate parts, how you bring them together makes the magic far more than any of the stuff that's happened in the middle here. Any broad questions? And please don't tell me that I need to use parallel compression or whatever, otherwise I'm missing out. You've done that, dude. If there are broad questions about the theory, the idea of it, pop them on down below. Once I become aware of them, I shall come and partake in the discussion. And of course, everyone else is welcome to participate in the discussion, so long as we're being productive. If you're not being productive, as I said to, I think it was Paul Third, yes, Paul Third this morning, because he's realised that arguing with people who just want to be negative, as in destructive, criticism is discussion to try to get a point across to either understand, well, what's happening here, why, is part of discussion, or criticism is like, when you did that, I think this went wrong. That's fair enough. Everyone should raise that. That's not being negative. But people coming along and just going, you suck, cause that's negative, that's not discussion. We'll just get rid of that. Don't go down that path. Right, that's it. Benedict for Higher Hertz. There's higherhertz.com. There's a reason I stopped doing that. Go over different kind of information there. There will have been some other videos that I gave stuff up there about little pictures to sort of say, here you can go watch them, like the one on Reverb. Just have a look, you will find them. There's a great big screed of videos there. Most importantly, go out, try this, play with it, but only when you have a real purpose. Otherwise, you just add layers of technicality and probably break your mix. Have a great day and enjoy what you do.